Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a historical and mathematical puzzle that has literally fascinated scholars for centuries. We're looking at the first man in history, Adam, and how he somehow generated two completely different timelines for all of human history.
So think about this for a second. What if the first man actually lived 1,500 years earlier than we thought? We're going to look at Adam not just as a figure in the book of Genesis, but as a historical singularity. It's the exact point where two distinct chronologies mysteriously diverge. Imagine looking at the exact same historical record, but walking away with a starting point that's off by a millennium and a half. Well, that is exactly what happened in antiquity.
Part 1. Adam, the historical singularity.
You see, everything in ancient biblical chronology starts with this one man. As we see in canonical texts like Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15, Adam is the archetype. He is the absolute anchor point of humanity, viewed as the first man in contrast to Christ as the new Adam. But here's the catch. When we actually try to place this first man on a timeline, the earliest historical documents simply don't agree. And we're not talking about a minor rounding error here.
To understand this historical mystery, we first need to talk about text families. You can think of these as groups of ancient documents that share unique characteristics, maybe some shared errors or stylistic choices, all based on where they were copied and by whom. Specifically, we're going to focus on two major ones: the Hebrew Masoretic text, which we'll call the MT, and the Greek translation known as the Septuagint, or the LXX.
Part 2. Two timelines, one Adam.
Now, these two ancient text families mathematically diverge right out of the gate. They're both looking at the exact same genealogy, but the numbers they record, wildly different. Let's just look at the very first generational leap. The MT states Adam fathered his son Seth at 130 years old. Meanwhile, the LXX places this exact same event an entire century later, recording that Adam was 230 years old.
And this 100-year discrepancy? It wasn't just an isolated typo. It cascades down through the antediluvian patriarchs. We're talking Seth, Enosh, Canaan. Almost every single generation in the LXX text family adds exactly 100 years to the patriarch's age at the time of fatherhood when compared to the MT. It's like a snowball effect, creating a massive, compounding rift in the calculated age of the world.
This cascading math results in a staggering 1,497-year difference between the creation dates of these two text families. To put that in perspective, if you follow the math backwards, the Greek LXX timeline places the creation of the world at 5501 BC. The Hebrew MT timeline, however, starts much, much later, at 4004 BC. So, the really crucial point here is that these two timelines run parallel, operating at this huge 1,500-year deficit, until a pretty amazing mathematical phenomenon occurs. They finally managed to close the gap and sync up on an actual historical calendar year during the lifespan of Abraham. In the year 1996 BC, both systems point to the exact same moment in history. The loop finally closes.
Part 3. Motivations behind the divergence. So why did powerful historical institutions eventually pick sides, locking in one timeline over the other? Well, for over 14 centuries, the early church universally used the Greek LXX. It was literally the text the apostles quoted. But around AD 400, Jerome translated the Bible into Latin, creating the Vulgate, and he made a huge choice. He based his Old Testament on the Hebrew MT chronology, and that decision planted the seed for a massive institutional showdown centuries later.
Fast forward to the Reformation, and Protestant leaders began appealing directly to those Hebrew MT texts, arguing for what Jerome called Hebraica Veritas, Hebrew truth. In a direct defensive reaction to this, the Catholic Church formally locked in Jerome's MT-based Vulgate as their official text at the Council of Trent. Ironically enough, they ended up defending a text that shared its chronological base with the Protestants, which officially sidelined the older LXX timeline in the West.
Part 4. Prophecy and the calendar. This 1,500-year divergence didn't just alter history, it fundamentally shifted how humanity viewed the impending end of the world. Time practically became a countdown clock. Both text families were actually weaponized to build a 6,000-year predictive calendar for human history. This was based on a really poetic theological idea drawn from 2 Peter and Psalm 90, basically suggesting that the 6 days of creation equals 6 millennia of human history, which would then be followed by a Sabbath rest.
As you can imagine, this caused absolute chaos. Because their starting dates were so different, their doomsdays were different. The LXX timeline aimed for a climax right around AD 500, and when that passed without the world ending, it caused massive ecclesiastical embarrassment.
The MT timeline, on the other hand, pointed its 6,000th year to 82,000, which, well, also passed without incident.
But despite the failed doomsday predictions, the MT maintained a very real apologetic strength. Its chronological framework beautifully aligned with other messianic prophecies. For instance, Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks. When anchored to the Persian king Artaxerxes I in the MT timeline, it lands with striking precision right in the 1st century AD. This gave the MT a massive theological advantage that the LXX just couldn't quite match.
Part 5. Time as spiritual combat.
Now, as these predictive calendars failed, early thinkers completely shifted their perspective. Instead of looking for a literal end date on a calendar, theology started focusing inward on concepts like the anastases, or the harrowing of hell. In this tradition, the new Adam, Christ, descends to seek out the old Adam. Time is transformed from a terrifying countdown into this beautiful story of hopeful redemption and retrieval.
Thinkers started to realize the 6 days of creation weren't 6,000 years just waiting to end. They represent interior spiritual combat. Under this view, every single ordinary day you live is cosmically significant. It is its own millennium. The dragon you're supposed to be slaying isn't some external apocalyptic event on a calendar, it's the disorder right within yourself.
This maps directly onto the spiritual combat traditions of early figures like Cassian and later Ignatius. It demands that we treat our interior kingdom as the primary battleground. It teaches us that the true Sabbath rest isn't a date in the future, but rather the peace that follows genuine interior victory over our own disorder.
Part 6. The transmission of ancient texts. So, we've explored how one man, Adam, set off 2 wildly different timelines that deeply shaped centuries of prophetic and spiritual thought. But this brings us to a crucial historical pivot point. We have to move from the theological mystery of his life, the content, to the physical manuscripts that actually recorded it, the transmission. Because, let's face it, without the physical texts, we have no timeline at all.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, profound thought to carry with you. How exactly did these 2 diverging ancient text families physically survive wars, empires, and millennia to shape the dates, the prophecies, and the spiritual framework of the world we know today? Well, that text transmission is a whole other mystery just waiting to be uncovered.